All right. Well, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Zoran Josipovic. And I've known Zoran for like about 20 years now. He's been teaching affective neuroscience and cognitive neuroscience in the master's program of psychology at New York University for about that amount of time. And his doctoral research was on the neural correlates of non-dual awareness, and he created a non-duality institute for further research. He's been looking at EEG during non-dual awareness and non-dual consciousness, and has published quite a few articles on non-dual awareness. I think he's now considered the expert on non-duality consciousness and non-dual awareness. So take it away, Zoran Josipovic.
Right. So, so as you could see from the write-up, there is an aspect of consciousness that is not researched enough. And in the view that I'm going to present today, it is kind of the key element that I think is missing in today's consciousness research. And so, and that is, what is basically can be called consciousness itself or consciousness as such. So just to kind of give a little bit of a background, everything that is consciousness, right? That's a famous statement, an old saying from some earliest Upanishads and sutras and so on. And it can be, we can think of it as, all right, so that's trivial. Everything is consciousness because we define consciousness as our experience. So of course, everything is our experience. That's the only thing we know is whatever we're experiencing at that level, phenomenal. It is also an intriguing kind of a statement because as more and more people are kind of beginning to research it, there could be a level of reality, the consciousness in some form, could be actually foundational to what reality is. And then it is also a profound statement because when we discover this foundational level of our consciousness or consciousness itself, within our own experience, that actually has capacity to transform our experience and to liberate us. We can think of, let me see if I can just minimize this. All right. So we can think of totality of our experience or consciousness as having two sides. One is a relative, constructed and changing side that's made of various phenomenal content, perceptual, affective, and cognitive, different functions that create these contents or influence them. Attention, monitoring, both involuntary attention and working memory, long-term memory, and so on, decision, imagination, meta-cognition, meta-awareness, all those. And then global states that influence globally experience, wakefulness, dreaming, deep sleep, altered states, different meditative absorption states, and so on. Then there's also something that in contemplative traditions is called indeterminate substrate, something that generally unconscious, but it's not non-conscious. And we'll see in a minute what that is. It influences our ordinary experience. Much in the sense the way that psychodynamic unconscious is taught to influence our experience. Different from those.
Zoran,
Yeah.
might be just me, but maybe you need it could help to be a little bit louder, I think.
No problem. Okay, let me know if this works.
This is good.
Okay, so different from this, relative aspect. Relative here is just a designation. We don't, it's nothing metaphysical is implied by it. is what we could call the absolute or relatively unchanging aspect, which is pure consciousness or awareness itself, which is in itself empty, it's non-dual, it's non-representational, as we'll see, and it's also intrinsically reflexive. These two have been understood to be the two aspects of our human experience for a long time, like Purusha and Prakriti in the ancient Sankhya philosophy, Shiva Shakti. The image here is an artwork representation of a Tibetan Buddhist meditation deity, Chakrasamvara and Paramasukha, and so on. These are just symbolic representations, of course. Sorry. Now, these two are together, or one, but how we think of this non-duality or oneness differs in different traditions and different philosophies. And the way I see them is that there are sort of incomplete non-dualities or oneness theories, and then there is more kind of a complete version. So there are kind of a monistic non-dualities which take this non-dual to be literally not two, and try to kind of collapse the two sides of experience into one. So either only absolute only, where emphasis is on subjective aspect of experience, or relative only, where emphasis is on objective aspect of experience. So it tries to kind of ignore or suppress one side of experience. So not exactly non-duality, but more kind of literal interpretation. And then there's indeterminate type, which basically tries to suppress experience altogether, not to have any kind of experience or consciousness. And then actual non-duality, which means unity of absolute and relative. The two are together. And so that is just as a background. So what I will be talking about today comes from mostly from these two recent papers. One that just came out on the issues in the research of non-dual awareness, and last year one on the gradient of reflexivity, in other words, gradient of consciousness knowing that it is conscious. And then these other two papers are from the previous years, also pretty much on the same topic. So where does this coming from? Asian non-dual traditions, Tibetan Buddhist, Dzogchen and Mahamudra. Within Hinduism, there's Advaita Vedanta, other kinds of Vedanta which are close, Shaiva Siddhanta, and so on. There are a great many phenomenal reports, both ancient, which are sometimes couched inside the traditional text, and one needs to sort of decide what is basically a phenomenal report and what are inferences based on the phenomenal, based on experience. And of course, many new reports from practitioners and people without any experience or practice, to whom who spontaneously realize or experience this level of consciousness. Modern contemplative neuroscience research and consciousness research in general, and my own first-hand experience with different contemplative practices, kind of a 45 plus years now. Language is a little tricky if one is not accustomed to reading about non-duality or reading traditional non-dual texts. And here also it's a little more tricky because some of the terms are differently used than they are used in traditional cognitive science and neuroscience. So language can be awkward. Language is linear and subject-object constructed. Non-dual awareness and non-dual experience is unitary and doesn't have that structuring within it. But in order to talk, we have to use dualistic language. So there's a lot of contradictory statements and paradoxical statements. Some of them are very famous and are used as a teaching devices. Others are just annoying if one is not familiar with it. For example, saying that non-dual awareness is both transcendent and immanent in any experience at the same time. That's obviously a contradiction. How can that be? Non-dual awareness is both different from all contents and states, and it's not different from them also at the same time, right? So if one doesn't have a background in this or is not open to this, it's very easy to say, well, this is just a mindfuck, and what's the point of this? But it's actually it's not really that complicated once we can see how things appear from the side of non-dual awareness. Statements like there is no experience in non-dual awareness, yet non-dual awareness is experiencing as such. Again, contradictory but obvious. Everything is already perfect just as it is. Clearly, ordinarily speaking, not perfect at all. And if you move towards non-dual awareness, you're actually moving away from it. That also is a kind of an annoying statement, but these last two are used as a teaching tools, and we'll see down the line that they're not that mysterious at all. Okay, we are missing something. Okay, so key terms, consciousness in general, we mean experience. Consciousness itself, or in itself, basically this non-dual awareness. Sometimes the term is consciousness as such, clear light awareness, timeless awareness, innermost essence, all mean the same. Atman or Atmagnana in Hindu tradition, Buddha nature in certain Buddhist traditions, pure awareness or pure consciousness, all these mean same. In today's research, pure awareness and pure consciousness are usually used when one is experiencing isolated non-dual awareness, that is, this awareness without other content. Substrate basically occurs, it's an option that happens when this awareness does not know itself. It becomes kind of obscure to itself and replaces itself with the representation of conceptualized subject and phenomena with conceptualized objects, concept objects. So this substrate is like an unconscious. It contains both innate and learned conceptual structures like inside, outside, good, bad, self, other. And of course, whether they're innate or learned depends on who you ask. And it's not kind of relevant right now. And also, this is a potential for specific kinds of human experience, maybe experience in general. So not any specific perception, emotion, or thought, but the general potential for perceptual, affective, and cognitive experience. According to some, it includes certain memory traces, but not all memory traces. Representation, here, by representation, I only mean mental representation. So concept, schemas, propositions, semantic, iconic, and numeric symbols, I don't mean neural representation. That's a different question, the nature of neural representation, or any other kind of representation at the level of information or anything else. Reflexivity means that consciousness knows itself to be conscious. That's the only meaning of reflexivity here. And reflexivity can be indirect via mental representations, or it can be direct non-representational reflexivity. And in that case, it's a non-dual reflexivity, non-transitive, non-representational knowing by which this basic awareness, this non-dual awareness knows that it is aware. As we'll see, this is not some intentional act. It is actually a property, a key property of consciousness itself. Witnessing awareness is a term that is also used in research and also comes, it comes from kind of a translation of some traditional texts. It is a little tricky to kind of pin down, but if witnessing awareness is separate from phenomena, and usually it's presented like that in the beginning of one's contemplative practice, it is not yet non-dual. So it's not yet consciousness itself or non-dual awareness that we talk about, but instead it's a mix of consciousness itself and the unconscious substrate. In other words, it's this foundational awareness plus some amount of subject-object conceptual structure that, so to speak, kind of contaminates it. So there's like duality in it. It's not pure yet. Okay, now my general approach to research and thinking about things is broadly neurophenomenological, and in terms of phenomenal aspect of research, it's really not so much a traditional phenomenology, but more of a non-dual contemplative method. That is, in investigation by knowing and experiencing via non-dual awareness, via abiding in and as non-dual awareness. So as such, it's different from attending, it's different from monitoring, it's different from introspecting or imagining. So informed by meditation, and here meditation is basically sitting still doing nothing. And this is sort of good to keep in mind, because when we talk about how non-dual awareness is distinct from many other functions, we're generally talking about experience or realization of non-dual awareness within relative stillness of the body and not engaging in any activity. I only talk about human consciousness, and I'm generally only interested about human consciousness and relatively healthy adults, which are usually the subjects of this research, both mine and other researchers. And the level of discourse is phenomenal and neural. Some ontology and epistemics briefly, but in relation to phenomenal aspects of experience. And I will not address anything metaphysical or kind of in terms of modern physics like quantum physics and so on, and or any other kind of implied meaning. Okay, so the key premise that everything hangs on, that needs to be understood, at least that's how it is introduced in the many contemplative traditions that deal with this, is that there are two types of knowing that we are capable of. So one type of knowing is the one that we are accustomed to. So by knowing, I mean knowing and experiencing. And that is a representational kind of knowing that we all know about, which is conceptually constructed and structured. But there is another kind of knowing that's not as well known, which is non-representational knowing. So the knowing and experiencing without mediation by mental representation. So in some sense, these two are like either or, right? And especially when we are trying to access non-representational experience, we find that it's kind of buried under representational contents, and it takes usually takes some work to uncover it and for it to be stable so that we can access it when we want. So often they are portrayed as antagonistic to each other, but in reality, they co-occur. They actually overlap. And this is one of the reasons why it's difficult to research non-representational knowing. It's very hard to isolate the two. So just to give a definition of this basic consciousness itself, or non-dual awareness, it is a type of awareness. So that's very important because people often confuse it with states, being in some state or, perceiving something and so on. It is a type of awareness which is non-conceptual, non-representational, and non-dual. It's a foundational awareness that does not rely on mental representations to know, And because of that, it does not structure experience into conceptually reified duality of subject and object. However, once it is realized, or we can use a kind of meditation term, stabilized also, it can co-occur with any conceptually constructed aspects of experience, including conceptualized subject and object. So, again, another paradoxical statement from contemplative traditions: the reality is a unity of non-duality and duality. It doesn't make sense logically, but that's how it works. It is present, non-dual awareness is present in every conscious experience, however, implicitly or explicitly, as that which is conscious or aware in this way, in this non-representational. So, what is non-dual about it? It's non-dual within itself because it knows itself without having to take itself as a separate object of this knowing. And it's non-dual between itself and phenomena because it knows phenomena without having to take itself as a separate subject that knows phenomena as objects. And so it's a different way of knowing. Metaphor is like a completely clear crystal or completely clear space. Okay, so this is from this paper that just came out. Non-dual awareness is simplest, unconstructed, non-representational awareness that is conscious and that can know that it is conscious directly or non-transitively. In that sense, it can be called consciousness itself or consciousness as such. So that is a rationale for using these terms. Some people object to these terms. Now, this is good for people who like to understand neural processes. Functionally, it occurs after some minimal level of arousal or alertness is present, but before any attentional selection, either involuntary or voluntary. Its function is to simply mirror whatever content and state is present in experience, including its own presence. This basic mirroring function occurs most likely via some spontaneous recursive resonance, or mirroring resonance for short. This mirroring precedes mental representation. So before categorization, labeling, associating, evaluating, decision-making, it is also before the most rudimentary innate conceptual structures, such as inside, outside, subject, object, and so on. And it is before perception action cycle. So it is not a kind of a result of an action in response to perception. It does not actually act at all. It just functions like a mirror, doesn't do anything at all except mirror whatever is present. Before, has a temporal meaning, but really it means that it's less complex or unconstructed. Even though it is singular and homogeneous, it has self-evident properties when one realizes it or when one abides in and as this non-dual awareness. So obviously it is there, it's present, one is aware. It is empty. This is absence of things that are other than awareness. So it's there are no mental representations in it, or in itself doesn't have any other contents or states. So that is technically known within certain branches of Buddhism as other empty. It also doesn't call itself anything. It doesn't label itself. It doesn't need to identify itself conceptually in any way. So in that sense, it is self-empty. It is cognitively luminous. It is cognizant. It has a kind of a cognitive luminosity, and it's intrinsically reflexive. It knows that it is aware. It doesn't have to think about it, or it's without question. There's a very special kind of bliss that is part of it. I shouldn't say part of it. It's not a part, but it's property of it. And it's the very quiet or silent, empty bliss that actually is the bliss of being complete in itself. Nothing is lacking, nothing is needed. It is the completion of all striving or and all kind of reward seeking. So it is autotelic in that sense. And it is singular and homogeneous. It's not made from the parts and their interactions. In some traditions, they state it as it's a complete unity of dimensions. So dimensions are not elements, separate elements that it's made. Okay, go back. Now, there are some extended dimensions that we frequently find in literature and in people's reports. And of course, we can find it in our own experience. One thing is this boundless spaciousness. This awareness is like one continuous epistemic space without boundaries of inside and outside, without edge. It pervades or extends to our entire experience, whatever our experience is. So if our experience is a tiny little perceptual bubble, then it's a tiny little space. If it's like a very big perceptual bubble, then it's a very big space. But it doesn't have a boundaries like inside, outside, left, right. It's one continuous space. It is non-local. It is present everywhere throughout the entire space of our experience. It is timeless, doesn't have a past or future. It is like, it is even beyond nounness because it is not a fixation into present. Fixating on a present is sometimes used as a kind of a practice. But this doesn't have any kind of fixation. It simply doesn't have it's a timeless or eternal feeling because it doesn't change at all. It's invariant, or we can say it's relatively invariant. Remains self-same despite the changing contents and states. And it is thought to be self-originated. It is not made as a product of other functions like attention, monitoring, memory, imagination, and so on, meta-cognition. And in that sense, it is uncreated or without birth and unceasing without death. That, of course, those are metaphors. Embodied dimensions, so dimensions
Zoran,
that are, yes?
I had a question. So the definitions and properties you're describing, do they allow a means to measure this non-dual awareness? Because that's a perennial question a lot of people ask. Is it measurable
Yes,
via
absolutely.
certain definitions? Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm just going to get to, that's on the next slide after this.
Okay,
So
great.
that is of course the big question. So embodied dimensions. Non-dual awareness can be experienced either without any content, other content but itself. In other words, it can be isolated from all other kinds of experience. The way it happens in absorption-oriented meditations like TM or jhanas or any kind of absorption meditation, and it's carried all the way to the end. Or it can be awakened within ordinary experience just as it is. Whatever the experience is doesn't matter. There are ways to kind of wake it up so it recognizes itself. So when it is within ordinary waking consciousness, with all the, with the full phenomenal content, then there are certain properties that have been reported. For example, ecstatic bliss, which is much kind of a thicker, more intense feeling that it's thought to result from a contact of non-dual awareness and phenomena, contact of this awareness and perception and so on. There is a non-dual love and compassion, sometimes called non-referential love and compassion, which I think is actually the authentic open-ended affective baseline. when our affective baseline is cleaned out of the distortions, or that when that authentic baseline is recognized. Wisdoms are, there's no good way to put this. Sometimes people call them intuitive wisdoms, but unfortunately the term intuition means something different in cognitive science, where due to dual process theory, we think of it as sort of like fast thinking. This is something different. It is how non-dual awareness knows phenomena. For example, so these different ways of different aspects of knowing become like categories of wisdoms. So it knows phenomena as being all equal, as being clear, as being, and so on. There's like luminous and so on. Unity or non-duality is how it appears with phenomena. And the self here, probably one can say this is a intrinsic, actually, dimension, but it is not the self, constructed self that we usually talk about and refer to when we think about selves. So it's not a proto-self as a homeostatic map. It's not the coarse self as a perspective, egocentric perspective, or the sense of agency, or the body ownership. Not that. It's also not any of the extended kinds of self, right? Whether it's a narrative self, social, any kind of social self, and any other extended self. All these are constructed. It is a self in a sense that it is you who is conscious behind all that. When all that is deconstructed, there is just this awareness, and it's not somebody else's awareness, right? It's you who has been aware all along in all your experience, right? But it's not you as a biological person or autobiographical person or anything like that. It's just you as a consciousness itself. So that's, in that sense, it is self. So, some traditions prefer to say it's not the self, some traditions prefer to say it's the self. Now, here's about measuring. Can we measure these dimensions separately? That would be hard. Challenging, some more easily than others. Right? So if it's truly singular and homogeneous, like it appears when it's isolated, then some people say you can't really model it, or at least you can't model it in terms of structural relations or some kind of a dynamics between its elements. You could hypothetically make the dimensions kind of a state space in which dimensions are vectors, right? And they define that state space. If we look at the reports, some dimensions appear more prominent at some times than others in one's experience. A person sort of attunes to that awareness, either isolated or within their waking experience, or some people can do it while they're dreaming or even in deep sleep. And then sometimes some dimensions are more, or properties are more kind of louder than others. If it is singular and homogeneous, how is it possible? And on this view, what probably happens is that these dimensions are, so to speak, reflected in some aspects of body-mind or in the substrate, and this is why they seem louder than others, while in itself, this awareness is homogeneous. There is a traditional way of maybe saying this from the Sankhya tradition, that pure consciousness can be reflected in the DUNES. Right. So if it gets reflected, if there is some element of sattva guna, then it's going to be pure consciousness, but the bliss component is going to be louder. If it's reflected in a tamoguna, then the being component is going to be louder. Or in a rajaguna, then luminosity component is going to be louder. That's, again, What exactly that is, for example, in terms of neural function, I don't think anyone knows at this point. One can think also that maybe these things happen just because of some fluctuation in neurotransmitters. Right? So if the tonic function of norepinephrine is dominant, then the experience is more silent and still. So there is this kind of you could say like this is more of like a being or an empty stillness experience, presence. If the phasic norepinephrine is kind of elevated, then there will be more luminosity, like a cognitive luminosity, right, aspect. This is just totally speculative, and I'm sure in the reality, of course, it's much more complicated than this. If dopamine is elevated, then there will be some kind of a bliss component. If serotonin, oxytocin, then maybe love and compassion, or love and kindness and compassion are elevated. So what I'm saying is, it is possible that in itself it is homogeneous unity of the properties, but depending on what is happening with one's body and brain, the experience can have different flavors. So this, there's another kind of a complicated thing, is that this awareness, being the most subtle aspect of our experience, gets quote unquote reflected, or I would say shines through the denser aspects of our experience. So the substrate being, sort of the next most subtle, and then the different layers of the mind, and then the different layers of the vital energy or emotion, and then the different layers of the body and perception. So there can be kind of a back and forth mirroring through these layers. In some traditions, these layers are called the levels of the coarseness or density. In the last couple of years or so, I've been particularly interested in the reflexivity, non-dual reflexivity, or inherent or intrinsic reflexivity of this awareness. The fact that this really differentiates consciousness as we experience it as humans from any kind of a representational process, any kind of a AI or anything like that, and most likely from any other animal that we know. And that is that within us, for some reason, consciousness has recognized itself. Right? It woke up to itself and recognized itself. So this awareness is intrinsically reflexive. It knows that it is aware, and it does not need mental representations for that. It does not need to divide itself into subject and object or anything like that. And this inherent non-conceptual reflexivity is unique to consciousness itself, to non-dual awareness. It makes it what it is. It's kind of a main property. So when we think about how we know that we're conscious, we can see this gradation in terms of how representational or non-representational this reflexivity is. So on one hand, we can have a fully dualistic representational knowing where non-dual awareness is implicit entirely. It's not evident. And what's functioning is this representational conceptual knowing, the subject and object representation. So reflexivity is re-representation, like third order representation, right? So there's a first order, which would be, according to this view, would be awareness, and then the second order, according to these theories, is a representation of the first order, and then you have to re-represent that in the third order. And then, of course, someone will say, okay, well, how many times do you have to do that? It's kind of endless. it is transitive and intentional, then you can say that there is a kind of a transitional as the non-dual awareness becomes less implicit and it comes more to the forefront of experience. Still it's covered, but it's closer to surface, so to speak. You have a kind of a whole range of these kind of what can be called qualified monist states of knowing. According to certain theories, they are representational, they can be conceptual, they can be non-conceptual, but have some other representations. Some people claim they're transitive, some people claim they're non-transitive, although of course, if something is representational, how can it be non-transitive? Those are debates that kind of we don't need to get into, and it's always intentional. There has to be this kind of intention, so it has to, of course, be transitive, even if people claim otherwise. The non-dual awareness is fully explicit, then the knowing that we're conscious, that it's knowing that it's conscious doesn't need any representation, it doesn't need concept. There's no transitive sense of any kind. It's just it's what it is. And it's non-intentional in that sense. So the first point, kind of conclusion, is that non-dual awareness or consciousness itself, this kind of foundational level of our conscious experience, is a unique kind and cannot be reduced to other aspects of experience, content, other function states, or to representations of these, or representational models of these. That, I think, is a kind of a point I have been making. So why it cannot be specified by global state? Because it remains relatively unchanged as the state fluctuates. Most non-dual contemplative traditions have these traditional, very famous statements that once you have really realized it and stabilized it, it's there, whether you're awake, whether you're dreaming, whether you're in deep sleep, and according to some, even when you're dying, it's there. Just excuse me for a second. I'm just a little bit to keep track of time. I'm running out of time here. So it is not a state, like an altered state. It's just something that's aware within any state. It doesn't matter. It's orthogonal to content also. So both to any kind of type of content. So it's not any specific perceptual, affective, or cognitive content. Again, it's that which is aware of content. And it doesn't matter whether there is a lot of content or there is like no content. So it doesn't, one can be, you can have an absorption state without any other content, or you can have a hypomanic episode of some kind of ecstatic experience. The non-dual awareness is there, once it's realized, relatively unchanged. We can have now absorption state by itself, that is reducing phenomenal content by itself, is sometimes mistaken for this awareness. It's not yet consciousness itself. It's not yet pure consciousness, because you can simply reduce the phenomenal content and enter into a kind of a state akin to deep sleep, in which there is no consciousness. So nirodha in the mindfulness practice, various kinds of samadhis, in other practices, they're not yet consciousness itself. Consciousness itself is, or this awareness is not a jhana. It's not something that one creates by meditating on it. It's not something that can be perceived as an object. If one is perceiving it as an object, it's not yet non-dual awareness. It can be specified by other functions. The point of this is a little boring, but the point of it is that what often happens in research is that we conflate this fundamental consciousness, aspect of consciousness, with these other aspects of experience, and we are reporting other aspects of experience as if this is what, as if they are the, this consciousness. And so it's not any of the functions that influence and create experience. It's not an attention, whether it's a voluntary attention or involuntary attention, because attention is fundamentally a selection of some aspect of experience versus the rest. Non-dual awareness is choiceless. It's literally like a mirror. It doesn't do anything. It's like a 3D mirror that fills the entire space of experience, but it does not make any action, whatever. So there's no selection. Any kind of monitoring is oriented towards optimization, right? So the monitoring is trying to kind of track and optimize the experience. And various types of meta-cognition, meta-awareness in service of monitoring are meant to optimize experience, or at least make sure that it is according to some sort of a preconceived standard. Non-dual awareness is not like that. It's not concerned with optimizing. It's not, it doesn't have any pre-programmed, priors, how things should be. It's unconcerned with good or bad. And, some advanced practitioners have said that really it's not concerned with life or death, that one actually is, from that level, doesn't matter whether one is alive or dead, or at least to it doesn't matter. Now, it could be adjusted biologically. It's just a very simple awareness. And it's even prior to kind of a homeostatic maintenance. And the evidence of that is that when it's truly isolated from experience, either through some very deep meditation, which is actually quite rare, but it can also happen when one attains lucidity in the early moments of lucidity during deep sleep. Like if one attains lucidity in like a stage 3 or something like that, or even 4 of sleep, there's no content and there's no sense of body at all. There's nothing but awareness. And so it somehow, it seems to be orthogonal to circuits that are involved with homeostasis. It is not a critical meta-awareness. So it has, people from the mindfulness traditions have tried to sort of brand it as a kind of an output of monitoring or some sort of result of monitoring, something that actually is kind of created through development of monitoring practice. It is more like difference between being and doing. Right? So this foundational consciousness is not trying to do anything. It's not trying to fix anything. It's just there, mirroring whatever is present. Sometimes it is contrasted, like it's more like a being rather than doing something, mentally or in any other way. It is not a memory, either working or long-term memory. It's not the manipulation of the representations in working memory, and it's not to reconstruct from the memory. Of course, memory occurs, but awareness itself, the terms are like ever fresh or uncreated or unconstructed. Probably it has a very short memory capacity. It can track what is present, but not, when you're in it, there's no sense of capacity to kind of think things through or solve anything, or it does not itself remember any past. The memory, of course, as well as all other cognitive functions, they co-occur with it. So that's different, right? But in itself, that's not it. It's not a real representation, so it's not a meta-cognition. So on the left is a traditional neurological map of conscious experience in terms of wakefulness, degree of wakefulness or arousal in the brain on X, and content, how much content is in awareness on Y. There's actually, it conflates the awareness with these two, definitely with the Y-axis. So in terms of non-dual awareness, we can reorganize this. So over here, if you look at on the right, there's a global state. So it's coming from the back to front, but it's actually, this is the X. And then phenomenal content is on the vertical Y. And then this sort of angled thing over here on the right, lower right, is non-dual awareness as a third dimension. And this gradient is, as I mentioned, so in the beginning, we say it's either or, like either non-dual awareness is there or the of everything else is there, but it's not like that. There's like a gradient. So it could be completely implicit or buried. And then we have a normal experiences. The more buried it is, and that is of course a speculative claim, but it's a claim made by many traditions, the more disordered and fragmented our experiences. In other words, less unified, there's less being and presence, less cognitive luminosity, less bliss, even if they are indirectly experienced. So the more, if you ordinarily, we think the more stressed you are, right, the less. Now, of course, large amount of disorder can cause a breakthrough that can reveal in the organization of ourselves, that can reveal some aspects of non-dual awareness or maybe transitional states. There's a transitional part of the gradient, and this is where most of the so-called spiritual experiences are, before awareness is recognized. Different types of unbounded experience, loss of boundaries, different lights, different types of absorptions, lucidity, during dreaming. You're lucid, but you're lucid. Ordinarily, you don't recognize this awareness, but awareness is coming closer to surface. It allows for lucidity, although this lucidity is conceptual and dualistic. Right? Then there could be moments of pure perception, which is like perceiving with non-dual awareness, and that's very close, but just awareness hasn't yet woken up to itself yet. But other stuff is quieted down, and there's awareness and perception. Then I have emptiness. That's a misnomer. It should say bare non-conceptuality. It's possible to have experiences in meditation of being present, but there are no thoughts or concepts in the mind. So again, it's a close, but awareness hasn't yet recognized itself. It needs like one more step. Same with absorption, like let's say nirodha, where there's no experience of consciousness. There's no consciousness. So everything is quieted down, but you're now in the like a zero sort of option, like there's no awareness. So now one step further beyond that, and then there's just awareness, just consciousness without any content in it. And then when it becomes explicit, it means that it recognizes itself. In Shaiva Siddhanta, the term is self-recognition, but that term is a little bit weird for us because it is not recognition. It's not a cognition in ordinary sense, and it's not like a recognizing something that you have previously cognized conceptually. It's a different kind of a knowing. It's an awakening of that innate reflexivity. And one can say that at first, one can experience it as a transcendent to other phenomena. That is, it functions like an epistemic space within which everything else occurs. except that this epistemic space is non-representational. Then it can also, when it becomes deeper, it becomes immanent. This transcendent and immanent are really like two aspects of the same thing, but immanent is like, it appears as if it is a substance out of which everything is made. And further on that gradient is a singularity where there's no kind of sense of separate awareness or separate pure consciousness and separate phenomena. It's all just one experience, just as it is. The drawing didn't quite work out because these names are too long. These are actually parts of the gradient, not necessarily there are many different kinds of experiences within those parts of the gradient. Okay, so the gradient indicates how content and state appear in non-dual awareness. In other words, the degree to which the properties of non-dual awareness are reflected in phenomena. And there's this very famous metaphor used in many traditions of the glass of water with ice cubes in it. I was told many years ago when I was in India that actually some India in general came up with this idea, but I think it's very old. The idea being is that the water is both the medium in which ice cubes are floating and also the substance out of which they are made. And likewise, this fundamental aspect of consciousness is both the space in which everything occurs, which our experience occurs, and it's also the substance that makes, out of which everything is made. So this view is called simultaneous transcendence and immanence view. It's been around for a long time. How much further can I go beyond this? Or can I go any further beyond?
Well, I would think this is a good way to wrap it up. These issues.
All right, so let me just run into issues very quickly, and then I can wrap it up. So I'll skip this. There's ontological issues regarding claims that non-dual awareness does not exist, and I talk about them at length. Here I just put notes for myself, so this doesn't really mean not. The other big argument is that it's not inherently or intrinsically reflexive, and these also are refuted not just by me, but by many other people traditional. Self-reports have many same things that self-reports always have. One of the issues is that non-dual awareness is now very popular, so people tend to label any kind of experience non-dual awareness, just as there was a phase of TM research when people would just feel a tiny bit of relaxation and they would say, "Oh, I had experienced pure consciousness," right? Not really, right? So that kind of confuses the research, and if you take it at the face value and then do do some neural measurement, the neural measurements go kind of all over the place, even more than they usually are. We know there's a great deal of variability from person to person, and also from one moment to another within a single person, or one part of the day to another part of the day, and so on. So methods to get to non-dual awareness is not the same as non-dual awareness. Right? We can use focused attention or monitoring or mantra or any other to for example, isolate non-dual awareness, but that method is not non-dual awareness. And I used to talk to Fred Travis about this. Also, this applies to direct pointing out instructions that are used in adoption and in some Neo-Vedanta schools. It's not any of those pointing out instructions, right? Those are just metaphors or kind of pointers to get you to recognize, for it to recognize itself. Part of the problem in discussions is that there are two really different goals in these contemplative practices. One is some kind of optimization toward perfection according to ideal, and the other is freedom or authentic being in the kind of ultimate sense. And those are actually two quite different. In some traditions, they're sort of putting together, but in others, it does not, the two different groups can't talk to each other. And a lot of problems are because they're just coming from two different perspectives. In terms of the neural issues, we know all this. We have limitations of instruments. We have a difficulty deciding which scale we're going to look at. There is this awful issue of neural degeneracy, that different parts of the brain can basically do all kinds of things depending on what kind of network they are mobilized, and they can be mobilized in all kinds of different networks at different times. And as several researchers have stated, the correlates, neural correlates that we have found so far, they lack specificity. They could be neural correlates of non-dual awareness, but could be neural correlates of other things. We don't yet have a precision to differentiate. Mathematical modeling, of course, now there's a lot of excitement around active inference and attempts to model pure consciousness through lack of priors and so on. The question for all of those, including IIT and new neural network things like LLMs and LQMs, is do they actually correspond to what's happening physiologically, or this is just a kind of they make a nice picture mathematically. Different things people have found different neural correlates. Alpha synchronization in PFC, global frontal-parietal synchronization, precuneus network, which is also parietal frontal, paralimbic areas, reticular activating system, salience networks, and so on. Are we looking at a neural correlates of non-dual awareness, or are we looking at neural correlates of techniques? So if we attend to bodily sensation, like in mindfulness as a main technique, then we're going to see a lot of activation in insula and some of the sensory areas. If you practice cognitive monitoring, we're going to get a salience network. There's overlap between these. If we practice focused attention, we're going to get a lot of dorsal attention network activation. If we are attending to self, it's going to be DMN and the frontal paralimbic areas. And if we primarily practice absorption without kind of effortless absorption, then there's going to be global cortical hyperactivation. So those are signature of these techniques. To what extent they overlap with non-dual awareness is the question. We did this defining intrinsic and extrinsic system and found that in the waking, fully awake consciousness, people, it has different effects. Focused attention has different effect from non-dual awareness. Basically, focused attention, like many other types of meditation, increases segregation of the intrinsic default mode network and extrinsic systems like attention or control system. Non-dual awareness integrates them because it's the rationale is that it is the integrative space that includes everything in experience. What is different? Let's say here the meditators are watching movie clips and they're not actively meditating, but they're watching movie clips sort of in their ordinary watching or within the non-dual awareness, and increase in activation in this precuneus network, particularly in the posterior part. There are a couple of areas in the prefrontal DLPFC, we don't see them here. And Margulis in 2009 did these famous anatomical studies and found this so-called cognitive precuneus network, which is on the left in green. And there is further research, of course, since then. It's very hard to get precise segmentation, functional segmentation in this area because it's buried inside in kind of a hard to reach place. What we found when people were doing non-dual awareness versus the rest, with eyes closed, so relatively isolated awareness, of course they're in the scanner, so it's very, in fMRI, so it's noisy. but decrease of connectivity with the precuneus and right angular gyrus, meaning that there is a relaxation of the body boundary. I mean, that's how to interpret it. And then increase in the connectivity with the right and left, also lateral prefrontal cortex. And here the interpretation is that awareness knows itself. So, if one wants to interpret it in a kind of a transitive information way, the awareness is online to itself. This is back from the days when Barry and I had a little lab at NYU, and this was visited by Mathieu Ricard. And so this is his normal. This is just all of the channels together from MEG. So the normal state seems a bit noisy, but anyways, nice these two peaks, which we always see both with EEG and with MEG. So around 100, between 100 and 150 and 300, right? When he is in awareness, they decrease, but the 300 is almost gone. So there's no reinterpretation or re-representation of this in this P300. What happens when top-down predictions become attenuated? People now are making models of that. Lau Conan and also Sandwich Smith are the young guys who are big into this. This is also from one of our subjects. I'm not entirely confident what this fellow was doing, but I'm just using it here as an example of what happens. Green line is meditation, and blue line is rest. And so as the top-down prediction relax, we would expect that response to stimulus, if this is just a simple auditory sinus tone, would shift forward and would be louder, right? That's sort of one simple kind of possible thing. This is we're still working on this. So these are people experiencing this non-dual awareness fully awake with eyes open, sitting. In the top horizontal row, we see on the right is non-dual awareness. So we see some increase in symmetry. I think this was alpha. And then in gamma, we see this increase. So the bottom is a measure of entropy or criticality. So we see increase in criticality and relative disorganization of these front versus back attractors, right? So ordinarily, our brain is largely organized into these front and back, strong front and back attractors, and that sort of seems to relax. And this, of course, again, none of these are unique to non-dual awareness, right? So the increase in criticality occurs with hallucinogenics. It occurs with other kinds of meditation that are more open, right? It doesn't occur with focused attention. It occurs when there's more kind of relaxed state that allows for open kind of experience. Okay, so that's all. To summarize, maybe the best way to test this is without interfering with experience, just in the rest experience. That has its own problems, of course, because when one has realized non-dual awareness, and then it can really just stay there, then that meditation is described as a resting in the nature of mind or resting in the nature of one's consciousness. And so then we would want to test is how recognized that awareness is, how much that awareness is recognized itself. In other words, we want to figure out how to test that reflexivity gradient of consciousness. In general, this is the last slide, 3 kinds of experiments can be designed. The first is to differentiate this awareness from other functions like attention, monitoring, and so on, or from states. Then the second would be to test these intrinsic properties, and this goes to what someone asked me. These dimensions themselves also occur on a gradient, right? How realized they are, or how present they are, how explicitly present they are in experience. And third would be to look at how perception, emotion, and thought, or affect and cognition change when non-dual awareness is explicitly present in experience. Or also how dimensions are reflected in experience. So other people have done this. I have done it. We have also done this. So when we say that intrinsic and extrinsic networks are more integrated, what we are really saying is that this is the effect of non-dual awareness on division between the internal and external environment, the experience inside oneself and the experience outside of oneself. But people have tested, effects on perception and affect and so on. Okay, well, thank you for being so patient, and thank you for enduring the difficulty with connecting. And if you have any question, or if there's a time for any questions, we can now do that.
Yes. Well, of course, on behalf of everybody, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do such a thorough presentation of non-dual consciousness. So first, let me make sure that any participant who has a question has a chance right now to ask a question.
Yes, is there anyone around still?
Yes. There are some people who are quite interested in the topic and therefore have stayed with us. And it's a very hot topic, very interesting topic.
How do I get back to the screen?
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure. But I mean, this is I can minimize the part that's being shared, just by dragging the Zoom bar over.
So do you want me to stop the share at this point?
Well, you could keep it open just in case someone has a question about a
Okay.
slide to go back to.
All right.
That's fine.
Okay.
So I think it's still being recorded. Go ahead, Di.
Yeah, I'm still recording. We could stop the recording or keep it going through the Q&A. And
it's fine with me, however you want to do it.
yeah, we could maybe stop the recording so the Q&A is more freeform.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions, but